Thanks for watching, guys. New Zealand, South Africa. New Zealand going to South Africa, plays tests in January, very start of January, New Year's area. So that's when they're going to be playing. We'll start with the New Zealanders. This was supposed to be actually quite a happy little segment of this video. Of the New Zealanders had a great win in the second test against Sri Lanka, a win I never saw coming. But they beat the Sri Lankans and played all facets of the game well. Batted really well on day one, showed a lot of resolve, made something of their start, and bowled superbly. Rebound from the first test disaster, as they did in India to a lesser degree as well. Rebounded from the first test disaster and played well. New Zealand have been on the road for a long time now. They've played 6 straight tests on the road in 3 different tours: West Indies, India, Sri Lanka, and now going for a 3-test series in South Africa. So, as much as people like to bang on against New Zealand, that's not much fun to play 4 tours in a row. And yeah, so they've been up against it, and they've won a couple of road tests. Won 2 of their last 7 road tests, which a lot of good countries, India comes immediately to mind, and although maybe they're not a good country anymore, but England, for instance, hadn't done until recently. So New Zealand maybe not so bad. That's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be focusing on this sort of positive stuff, and we will talk some positives. But of course, the main news out of New Zealand last week has been Ross Taylor's dumping as captain. That test victory was powered by Ross Taylor. In fact, Ross Taylor in their last 2 victories over Sri Lanka and Australia has scored 28% of the runs. It's an enormous amount. If you think of it in terms of even in a partnership, a player might score 45 to 55% of the runs. But 28% of their entire runs. It's a huge number. In the last 2 victories, he averages nearly 70, 69.5, with a 75% score percentage, 3 out of 4 innings, and a century in those 4 innings as well. He's the best player. He's the best player by a mile, in all honesty. I don't talk about him a huge amount necessarily, because we expect Ross Taylor to bat at a pretty good level. He averages 44 for his career in bad batting cards, which is not easy to do, and with not a lot of support. And he's really made himself into a solid test player, after it looked like for some time that Ross Taylor might be essentially a kind of one-day slogger. He's really a good solid batsman with a good selection of drives, and has worked hard at other parts of his game. Doesn't come naturally, works hard. He's a good player. Not going to quit playing because apparently their coach, Mark Hesson, didn't get along with him. If I was New Zealand, I'd be going, hey, look, we need our best player to play. Mark Hesson's a bit of a no-one, and the coach is hardly a huge issue. Ross Taylor's actually scored 18% of their runs on these 3 tours I talked about. So even if they aren't winning, Ross Taylor's a very big component of the batting card. Bigger than, well, probably, in all honesty, probably at the same level as Michael Clarke in terms of his importance to a team. Or not far away from that. Obviously, the rest of New Zealand's batting card isn't quite as good as even Australia's, but yeah, we're talking a massive loss, and it makes the series a complete non-starter. Nevertheless, we'll look at the reason why they won a test in Sri Lanka, and they've shown really a lot of fight and some good performances on these tours, are their young pace trio. And they're all young. They're 24, 23 and 22. That's Southey, Bolt and Bracewell respectively. Southey, for instance, this year has just exploded. 4.2 wickets a match at 22.64. Now remember, these are 4 of these tests are in Asia. And then in the West Indies, which aren't necessarily super responsive to pace. So Tim Southey will always look like the most stereotypical, needs a green pitch, cloudy skies kind of bowler, swing bowler kind of guy. He's been awesome. 4.2 wickets a match at 22.64, solved some of the economy rate issues he had early in his career. Previous 4 years, I mean, Tim Southey was a bit of a joke, 42.8 at 2.7. A lot of people did count on Tim Southey and said, look, wait for Tim Southey to come around, and being just 24, they might be proved right. This is a big effort from him, and now going to a series in South Africa and then back home to New Zealand, much more favourable pitches for him. Trent Boult started his career on these 6 tests, also been great. 3.1 wickets a match at 30.77. That's not groundbreaking numbers, but that's really solid numbers for a young pace bowler going to Asia to start his career against good batsmen like in the Sri Lankan batting card. At just 23 years old. So a very promising career start for Trent Boult as well. Left arm, guy moves the ball off the seam, a lot of old ball skills, another promising player. Doug Bracewell, who was the big hero in Hobart when New Zealand beat Australia in Hobart, he struggled a bit this year, but his career numbers are still good. 3.2 wickets a match at 30.47, and he is the youngest of the trio at 22. Again, none of the 3 really so far are showing that they're going to be top 5 or maybe even top 10 pace bowlers at test level, but they're in the right direction. They're all young, and moving in the right direction, and that's really promising from New Zealand's standpoint. Unfortunately, this is not going to be much of a fun tour for him. And South Africa's batting card in particular has been batting awesome recently. We saw that in Australia where there were surprisingly large amounts of runs. Um, and yeah, and found Faf du Plessis, sorry, which everyone has talked about. He's obviously another young player, and that team's really coming together. That South African team. If you look through and you go, okay, opener, which we'll talk about in a second. That's come together. Number six, that sort of option. There's 5-6 options, or sorry, 6-7 options with De Villiers behind the stumps. Faf du Plessis looks like a more promising candidate than Duminy or certainly Prince or Rudolph. So they've got someone down there and adds another string to their batting bow. The tail, which looks very poor on paper, and Philander was struggling so much. Philander's now made a few scores in the last year or so. You look at the cohesiveness of the sides coming together. One issue that hasn't obviously is a slow bowling problem, but that shouldn't be a big issue here. I suspect they'll take a huge amount of new ball wickets with Stein and Philander and Morkel against a very, very, very depleted New Zealand batting card, which is already the worst in the world as it is. But yeah, that opening thing. So we said those young trio of New Zealand pace bowlers. And you might have in the past, you might have said, okay, look, Graham Smith, well, leave Graham Smith alone, just try and tie him up leg side fields, whatever. But we can attack one end immediately down the other end that Smith's not batting at, and then maybe get that guy out. New ball, expose Amla, get a new ball, wicket with Amla, and suddenly you got 2 for 15 was very much on the table, and then who knows. Problem is that I think I've watched a lot of Alvaro Peterson play this year. I've watched all his tests in England and all the tests in Australia. Been really impressed. I want to say really impressed. I think he's a great player, but it's just imagination. But he looks like a really solid test opener that can absolutely, especially with someone as good to bat with as Graham Smith, he can really flourish. I've sort of ignored him in previous analysis. So Alvaro Peterson this year, 47.94, extremely good. 26.3 score percentage is lower than you'd want. But again, obviously a lot of support down the card, Amla, Callis, etc. Not quite such a big deal. Awesome 6.3 century rate. That seems to be what gets him going. He's a real boundary orientated opener, which matches Smith quite nicely. Right left also works quite well. Alvaro Peterson's pull shot, cover drive. Maybe not like one of those guys that you would play it for if you could play slow bowling. But he's got 4 centuries already in his career, and against these New Zealanders as well, and also against England, India, and Sri Lanka. So Alvaro Peterson's now played enough cricket where we can go, look, he looks like a pretty reasonable player. And so that's solidified that top 4 strongly. That top 4 now looks impregnable. And behind that, AB de Villiers obviously as well. So the batting for South Africa in the last year has really surprised me how good it's been. I knew it was pretty good. It now looks awesome. It really looks amazing. And it has covered some of the sins of the bowlers, which have been a bit inconsistent. In all honesty, someone might say to you that Morkel's been the most consistent of their pace trio, and that's probably true. Philander has come back to earth a little bit. He's shown signs of frustration a little bit in England and Australia. And Stein is coping with not being at his best anymore, I think. I think that we're looking at a transitional period for Dale Stein into a bowler that's going to need more complete skills. He's going to need to be better with the old ball. He's going to need to be more economical, because I think those bursts that we expect from Dale Stein, where he takes 3 for 10, I think they're going to become more and more spaced out, infrequent. Philander, we'll see. I'm confident about Philander. His first class numbers are awesome. Anyway, all sort of moot, because as I say, this New Zealand batting card is really bad. It's really bad batting card. Even when they win, it's not been great, and when they win, it's been entirely on the back of the guy that's going to be playing. So it's pretty easy to say 3-0, unless there's massive weather here. I don't see how there could be any other result. Even if it's a shootout with, say, 350 runs wins the match, I honestly expect New Zealand to be bowled up for double figures at least once. I really do. I think that, look at that batting card, it should happen at least once. I would be pretty surprised if they got over 300 ever. I don't think they'll get over 300 innings in any of these games. So yeah, so when you're looking at that, can they get to 400 runs? Maybe, probably. 2 of the 3 tests, but 401 runs doesn't win you many test matches. So yeah, I think the results more or less speaks for itself. I said that about Sri Lanka, mind you, and South Africa do go to sleep at home at times, and New Zealand have got a reasonable road record recently, but I'm quite confident about this one, South Africa to win 3-0.